I kicked off my shoes and flopped down on the couch, letting out a deep sigh. Dropping Lisa off at the airport for her business trip had been a fucking hassle, as usual. The traffic was shitty, she was running late and bitching about everything. I was just glad to finally be home and have some peace and quiet. I poured myself a strong cup of coffee in the kitchen, needing a pick-me-up after that stressful start to the day. Settling back on the couch, I opened up my laptop to check my emails and unwind for a bit before dinner. As I was scrolling through the usual work crap, an email from Lisa's boss caught my eye. The subject line alone made my jaw drop. "Can't wait to see you." What the fuck? I muttered out loud, my face screwing up in confusion and disgust. I opened the email, hands shaking slightly, and felt my stomach lurch as I read the message from Jay. "Hey sexy, just a reminder for your flight today. Go commando under that skirt of yours. Leave your underwear at home for me. Oh, and make sure to bring that sheer black bra I got you. Can't wait to get you alone in the hotel room later for our business meetings." I slammed the laptop shut, feeling like I was going to puke. I couldn't fucking believe what I just read. My wife, dating her fucking boss? Cheating on me behind my back like that? Rage and hurt boiled up inside me as the reality sank in. I forced myself to take a few deep breaths to calm down. Okay, maybe it was just some sick joke or spam email, I tried to rationalize. But something told me that wasn't the case. I needed to look into this further. With shaky hands, I reopened Lisa's email account, my mind racing as I searched through her sent messages. That's when I found it, a folder simply labeled "Personal." I clicked it open and felt my heart plummet into my gut. Dozens, no, hundreds of messages between Lisa and Jay. Explicit details about their affair, times and places they would meet up for sex, raunchy sexts, and nude photos. It was all laid out before my eyes in brutal clarity. I sat there in stunned silence, the weight of my wife's betrayal crashing down on me like a fucking tidal wave. "I can't wait to bury my face between your thighs later, baby. Print. The diamond earrings are just a small token to remind you how much I adore you. Print. Meet me at the Hyatt at 3 p.m. I've got that black Prada purse you wanted waiting in the room. Print. Print. Print." I robotically hit the print button over and over, the incriminating messages spewing out of the printer in an endless stream. Each one was like a vicious slap to the face, the ugly truth becoming more inescapable with every printed word. By the time the printer finally ran out of ink, I was surrounded by a sea of crumpled papers, a damning paper trail documenting my wife's infidelity in excruciating detail. Shaky hands reached for the nearest cold one, cracking it open and chugging it down in desperate gulps. The bitter liquid provided zero relief as I slumped back on the couch, the dull buzz of the TV a mere white noise in the background. My eyes drifted over the emails again, bile rising in my throat. How could she do this to me? To us? After everything we'd been through together, she just cast it all aside for that douchebag Jay and his money? His ability to buy her expensive shit like she was some pampered little side piece? Rage and sorrow battled for control as I drained beer after beer, trying in vain to drown out the maelstrom of emotions ravaging me from the inside out. The life I thought I had, the woman I loved, it was all a mirage. The shrill ring of my phone sliced through the tension, Lisa's smiling face flashing across the screen. Gritting my teeth, I rejected the call at first, then thought better of it. I didn't want to tip her off yet, not until I could look into those deceptive eyes of hers. "Hey babe," I lied, forcing a casual tone as I accepted the call on the second attempt. "Everything okay over there?" As she prattled on about her shitty flight and the hotel mix-up, I zoned out, fresh waves of nausea crashing over me. My eyes bored into her contact photo, seeing the lies and deceit for the first time. I didn't say much, just letting her ramble as I stewed in my anguish and anger. We'd deal with this in person soon enough. I stared blankly at the spreadsheet on my computer screen, the numbers and formulas a jumbled mess. Normally, this shit was easy for me, a mindless routine. But not today. Not after. "Kevin? You okay, man?" I snapped out of my daze to find Dave, one of the accounts guys, giving me a concerned look. Shit, how long had I been zoning out? Yeah, Yeah, I'm good, I lied, rubbing my bloodshot eyes. I hadn't slept a wink last night, too busy wrestling with the gut-wrenching images of Lisa and that prick Jay going at it. Dave didn't seem convinced, but he dropped it and headed back to his cubicle. I let out a shaky exhale, scrubbing my hands over my face. I had to get my shit together and focus. Throwing away my career on top of everything else would only make this nightmare worse. But no matter how hard I tried to concentrate, the sordid details from those emails kept flashing through my mind like some twisted porno filmed in 4K. The thought of them tangled up together, his hands roaming all over her body, the body I used to worship. My fist clenched, crumpling the stack of printed emails I had brought from home. The paper cut into my palm, a sharp sting of pain finally snapping me back to reality. The clock mercifully hit 5 p.m. and I booked it out of the office, not even bothering to say goodbye to anyone. I had tried calling Lisa's hotel room a few times throughout the day, but it just kept ringing and ringing with no answer. My foot was leaning on the gas pedal the entire drive home. When I pulled up to the house, her car was there in the driveway. Of course it was, she had to make her grand re-entrance while I was stuck at work. I killed the engine and took a few calming breaths, the stack of emails clutched tightly in my white knuckle grip. Here we go. I stormed inside, slamming the door behind me. Lisa was in the kitchen, casually sipping a glass of white wine. Like she didn't have a care in the world. Oh hey babe, you're home here. I didn't let her finish, hurling the emails across the room so they fluttered around her like a perverse snowstorm of infidelity. Her face drained of color as she read through them, the truth finally inescapable. I can explain. Explain? I snarled, taking a step towards her. How you've been getting railed by your boss for God knows how long. Huh? Were you just gonna keep on lying and cheating forever? She didn't even try to deny it, her gaze dropping in shame. It's not like that. Jay, D can provide the kind of lifestyle I deserve. The shrill ring of her phone cut her off, Jay's name flashing on the screen. Of course, the prick was already calling to check in on his little side piece. Don't bother answering, I spat out, venom dripping from every word. In fact, don't bother with any of it. Just get your shit and get out. For a moment she looked shocked, like she couldn't quite process what I was saying. But I was dead serious, the Lisa I loved was already gone, may as well make it official. She opened her mouth, maybe to argue or plead, but seemed to think better of it. Her dad pulled up just then, having gotten a heads up from her. They worked in silence, Lisa boxing up her clothes and personal items like it was just another move. An hour later, she was gone, taking her betrayal and my broken heart with her. I stood in the wreckage of my shattered home. The rest of the night was a blur of bitter amber liquid and shattering glass. I must have passed out on the couch at some point, because I woke up with a start to the harsh rays of morning light burning into my eyes. My mouth was drier than the Sahara and my head was pounding out a sadistic drumbeat. Groaning, I reached for the nearest bottle, not even caring what it was anymore. The acrid taste of whiskey assaulted my senses, but I choked it down, desperate for any respite from the anguish squeezing my heart. That's how I spent the next 2 days, holed up in my own private purgatory, binging on booze and self-pity as I tried to wrap my mind around Lisa's betrayal. The rage, hurt, and disbelief swirled together into one big emotional maelstrom, each fresh wave threatening to pull me under completely. I don't know how I made it to Monday morning, but I somehow managed to drag my sorry ass into the office. Hunched over my desk, I nursed a thermos of black sludge, slowly trying to piece my shattered life back together. That's when the email from Lisa's lawyer hit my inbox, a cold, clinical dissection of our marriage, calculating it all down to ugly numbers and assets. According to the meticulously detailed spreadsheet, she had already drained our joint accounts, taking her fair share, and then some. I let out a hollow, mirthless laugh as I scrolled through the settlement terms. Fair share? She got way more than that, the greedy bitch. Not that it really mattered. I would have given her every last penny if it could have spared me this living hell. With a resigned sigh, I started checking the boxes, signing away the house, the cars, the retirement funds. What was even the point of fighting it? I was getting off easy if it meant being able to wipe my hands of her for good. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into purging every last trace of Lisa from my life. Our wedding photos, the cute nicknames, her toothbrush and robe, the fancy lingerie she used to prance around in for me. I banished it all into a pile of boxes, erasing her stain from my home for good. I'll never forget the day her brother Michael stopped by, a solemn look on his face. We had been pretty close once, but that seemed like ancient history now. I know this is gonna be hard to hear, he started, not quite meeting my eyes. But Lisa, she told me she regretted it all. Leaving you for that prick Jay. My jaw clenched hard, fresh tendrils of pain lancing through my battered heart. So she did have some small shred of conscience after all. She said you were just her starter husband, Michael continued, the words clearly paining him. White-hot rage blossomed in my chest, only to be smothered by the soul-crushing sadness that always lingered beneath the surface these days. I wanted to scream, to cry, to put my fist through a wall, but I just didn't have the energy anymore. I'm sorry you had to find out this way, man. I know she really did love you, once. Don't, I cut him off, holding up a hand to stop his meaningless placations. Just, don't. I can't keep doing this, opening up old wounds. Michael seemed to shrink a little, nodding in understanding. For what it's worth, I'm sorry as hell this happened to you, Kev. You didn't deserve any of this. Yeah, well, I sighed, suddenly feeling about 1,000 years old. I just want to move on, you know? Start over, try to find some semblance of happiness again. We exchanged an awkward, silent hug, two grown men struggling to process the cruelties life can dish out. As Michael turned to leave, I called out one last thing. Hey, Mike, thanks for telling me, I guess. Even if it was some harsh shit to hear. He mustered up a sad smile, patting me once on the shoulder. Anytime, brother. Just, don't let this break you, okay? I was standing in the grocery store, staring blankly at the beer aisle as usual, when a vaguely familiar voice snapped me out of my daze. Kevin? Kevin Johnson, is that you? I turned to see a friendly, slightly puzzled face that jogged something deep in the recesses of my mind. Oh, Sarah? Sarah Mitchell? She broke out in a warm smile, giving me a little playful shove. He remembers. The one and only. Damn, I haven't seen you since. High school, I finished for her with a nod. She looked mostly the same, a little older and wiser around the eyes, but still that kind, sunny vibe she always had. No kidding. What are the odds we'd run into each other here after all these years? She did a little spin, gesturing around the mundane grocery store like it was the fanciest club in town. I couldn't help but crack a smile, her infectious energy slicing through the gloomy haze I existed in lately. Yeah, really makes you feel alive, doesn't it? She gave me a playful swat on the arm. There's that classic Johnson sarcasm. But hey, I'll take it. It's better than the haunted look you had going on a second ago. My smile faltered a bit as I remembered my current reality. Right, the whole separated, soon-to-be-divorced guy thing. Sarah must have picked up on the shift in my mood, her expression softening. You know, Emily Thompson was actually asking about you not too long ago. She was trying to track down her mom's old yearbook, see if you were in there. Emily Thompson? The name sparked a faint memory. A cute girl with freckles and braces who I had a crush on back in the day. We weren't exactly close friends, but still. You wouldn't happen to have her number, would you? I heard myself asking. Sarah raised an eyebrow but didn't pry, simply pulling out her phone. For old time's sake, I guess. Let me just. She rattled off a number, which I quickly committed to memory. I'm not sure what possessed me in that moment, but I felt something. A fleeting glimmer of hope, maybe? Thanks, Sarah. It was really good to see you. She pulled me in for a warm hug, one that felt vaguely maternal. Like she knew I needed it more than I could admit. You too, Kev. And listen. She leaned back, holding me by the shoulders so I had no choice but to meet her sincere gaze. Whatever you're going through, it'll get easier. I promise. I just nodded, not trusting myself to respond with words. She gave my arm one last reassuring squeeze, then disappeared back into the crowd of shoppers. It wasn't until I was sitting in my car outside that I finally worked up the nerve to dial the number Sarah had given me. Hello? The voice on the other end was warm and slightly familiar, yet unmistakably older. More mature. Hi, Emily. This is, Kevin Johnson. From high school? There was a surprised pause before she responded. Kevin? Wow, I can't believe it's you. How did you? Crazy story, actually, I said with a nervous chuckle. I just ran into an old friend at the grocery store and she mentioned you were looking for me. Oh, yeah, I was trying to hunt down my mom's old yearbook for my daughter, Rachel. She's been obsessed with looking at all the vintage pictures lately. I see, I replied, my voice trailing off. Daughter? Of course she would have kids of her own by now. We weren't dumb, reckless high schoolers anymore. Well, listen, Kevin, it was really great to hear from you after all this time. We should, I don't know, maybe get a coffee sometime? Get caught up? I opened my mouth to politely decline, to start making excuses about being too busy. But something made me pause. You know what? Coffee sounds great. In fact, how about dinner instead? I'd love to meet Rachel too, if that's okay. There was another surprised pause on the line, but Emily quickly recovered. Yeah, dinner would be wonderful. Although, fair warning, Rachel can be a bit of a handful sometimes. Hey, I'm sure I can handle it, I replied with a confidence I hadn't felt in months. How about tomorrow night? We made plans to meet up at a family restaurant downtown, Emily texting me the address. As I tossed my phone aside and started the car, I felt an unfamiliar flutter in my chest. Was it hope? Excitement, even? I hadn't felt anything even remotely like that since before. A tiny voice in the back of my head tried to caution me about getting my hopes up, about not being ready to move on yet. But I stubbornly shoved it aside. Maybe Sarah was right. Maybe this was the first step towards things finally getting easier. I'd never know unless I tried. The next evening, I pulled into the restaurant parking lot, taking a few deep breaths to steady my nerves. I could do this. It was just a casual dinner between old friends. Emily was already seated at a booth towards the back with a bespectacled little girl with pigtails, who I assumed was Rachel. She waved me over with a warm smile, rising to give me an awkward hug. Kevin, it's so great to see you. You haven't changed a bit. I couldn't help but laugh at that. Yeah, something tells me that's not quite true anymore. I turned my attention to the little girl, who was eyeing me with open curiosity. And you must be Rachel? I'm Kevin, an old friend of your mom's. She nodded shyly, her eyes still sizing me up. Emily just chuckled, ruffling her daughter's hair affectionately. Don't mind her, she's just being her usual cautious self around new people. We'll have her smiling and chatting up a storm before you know it. I slid into the booth across from them, suddenly overcome by how normal this all felt. Like it was just an ordinary family dinner between people who had known each other for years. As a server came over to get my drink order, I caught Emily's warm gaze across the table. She gave me a little wink, mouthing, "It'll be okay." And just like that, I could breathe again. Maybe there was still some small kernel of hope left for me after all. The weeks started to blend together as I slowly adjusted to my new normal, or at least, as normal as things could be now. The house was quieter, lonelier, but also calmer. More peaceful, in its own way. I'd taken to spending my evenings working through a battered old stack of books I'd never had time for before. Anything to keep my mind occupied and off other things. Some nights I'd meet up with a few guys from the office to catch a game or grab drinks. Baby steps towards reclaiming some semblance of a social life. It was during one of those low-key happy hours that Dave dropped the bombshell. Lisa's sleazeball boss had wrapped his BMW around a tree after leaving a club drunk off his ass. The reports said he died instantly on impact. Oh, and get this, Dave continued in a low, conspiratorial tone, as if he were reporting vital gossip. Lisa was in the car with him. She's still in the ICU in pretty rough shape. The others in the group immediately started murmuring, their eyes cutting towards me with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. I just stared down at my drink, struggling to process this latest curveball. Part of me felt a perverse sense of justice, knowing the asshole had gotten his ultimate comeuppance. But the other part, the part that still loved Lisa, no matter how deeply she'd cut me, that part felt a hollow sadness at the thought of her fighting for her life. Before I could really unpack that tangled knot of emotions, my phone was ringing. It was Lisa's parents, their voices taut with worry and pleading for me to come to the hospital. I owed them nothing, and every fiber of my being screamed to refuse. But I went anyway, unsure if it was out of some sense of duty or just messed up curiosity. The Lisa I found in that cold, sterile hospital room was almost unrecognizable, swathed in bandages and tubes, her once vibrant face a battered mess. When she finally regained consciousness, her eyes went wide with panic and confusion. "Kevin?" she croaked out, her good hand feebly grasping at the air towards me. "Where were you? Why didn't you come sooner?" I opened my mouth to respond, to remind her of the brutal reality, but the words died in my throat. She seemed so lost, afraid, like a scared little girl, not the heartless woman who had shattered me into pieces. I'm here now," I heard myself murmuring, taking her hand and giving it a reassuring squeeze. "It's okay, Lise. I'm here." She seemed to relax at that, her eyes fluttering closed again as she drifted off to sleep. I stood there for a long while, my own eyes brimming with hot tears I didn't fully understand. When I finally made it home that night, I was an emotional wreck, my head and heart pulled in a dozen different directions. I didn't know what to think or feel anymore. So I did the only thing that made sense. I called Emily. "Kevin? Is everything okay?" I let out a shaky breath, suddenly overcome with the need to see her, to be around someone who represented hope and new beginnings, not this tangled web of pain and unresolved trauma. Can you meet me for dinner again? Tonight?" There was a slight pause on her end, but she didn't hesitate. "Of course. Same place as before?" I don't know what I was expecting when I arrived at the restaurant, but it certainly wasn't the warm hug and reassuring smile Emily had waiting for me. She didn't pry or ask any awkward questions, she just let me be. Rachel was her usual shy but effervescent self, seemingly picking up on my gloomy mood and going out of her way to show me her latest drawings and tell me all about her favorite books. By the end of the night, I was actually smiling and laughing along with them. It was like a glimpse into an alternate reality, one where I was just an ordinary guy, enjoying a simple family dinner without any lingering specter of betrayal hanging over me. The way things could have been if... No. I stopped that train of thought before it could derail me completely. I was doing so well, losing myself in the warmth and lightness of Emily and Rachel's company. Why ruin that? We lingered over dessert until the restaurant staff had to politely remind us they were closing up for the night. I walked them out to their car, giving Rachel a high five and promising we'd get to go to the zoo together soon. "Thank you, Dup, for tonight," I murmured to Emily, suddenly very aware of how close we were standing. "I really needed this." "Of course," she replied easily, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "What are friends for?" Friends. The words seemed to hang there between us, loaded with unspoken possibilities and the tantalizing promise of something more. Before I could dwell too much on that dangerous line of thought, Emily was giving me one last hug and shooing me back towards my own car with a playful wave. I watched them drive off, feeling lighter than I had in ages. Maybe this was my chance to finally move on. To start fresh and find that long elusive thing called happiness again. With people who had my back and wouldn't shatter my heart into rubble. I was still smiling to myself as I pulled into my driveway, already making tentative plans for the zoo trip with Rachel. But the second I opened my front door, my face fell. There, sitting on my couch in grim silence, were Lisa's parents. Her mother looked like she'd been crying for days, her husband's arm around her in a protective embrace. "Kevin," he started, his voice gravelly with fatigue and sorrow. "We need to talk about Lisa." I felt like I'd been plunged into a vat of ice water, the fragile sense of hope I'd been nurturing abruptly shattered. I opened my mouth to protest, to tell them I was done, that I couldn't keep putting myself through this endless cycle of trauma. But her mother cut me off, her eyes boring into me with desperation. She doesn't remember anything, Kevin. The accident, the affair, her divorce from you. It's all just gone. I blinked dumbly at them, my mind struggling to process what they were saying. Lisa had amnesia? She didn't remember betraying me in the most brutal way imaginable? The doctors say it's called retrograde amnesia, her father continued, his voice strained. She's lost all memories from the past year and a half or so. As far as she's concerned, you two are still married. A cold, hollow feeling settled into the pit of my stomach. Of course this would happen, just when I was finally starting to piece my life back together. We know this is unimaginable to ask, her mother said, reaching out to grasp my hand imploringly. But please, Kevin, you have to help her. Help her remember. I recoiled from her touch like it was a branding iron, shaking my head vehemently. No, I can't. I can't go through that hell again, not after everything. Please, she begged, her eyes overflowing with fresh tears. You're the only one who can get through to her. Who can help her find her way back? I'm sorry, I choked out, turning away from the twin masks of anguish they wore. I'm so sorry, but I just can't. I didn't wait for them to respond, brushing past them and fleeing upstairs to my bedroom. I collapsed onto the bed, chest heaving with ragged breaths as I wrestled with the warring impulses battering my heart. How could I turn my back on Lisa, the woman I had loved with every fiber of my being? The person I had sworn to love and protect forever? But then, how could I willingly throw myself back into the grinder after she had so utterly shattered me? I don't know how long I laid there, torn between guilt and self-preservation. But eventually, the sound of hushed voices and the front door opening and closing signaled that her parents had given up and left. I dragged myself up off the bed, my entire body feeling like it was made of lead. As I trudged downstairs, I could hardly believe my eyes. There, sitting on my couch with matching expectant smiles, were Emily and Rachel. Hey! Emily greeted me with a warm hug, seemingly oblivious to my inner turmoil. We didn't want to interrupt earlier, but we were hoping to take you up on that zoo trip today? I blinked dumbly at them for a long moment before managing a faint smile, my heart swelling at the simple joy and light they seemed to effortlessly radiate. You know what? The zoo sounds perfect. I was elbow deep in dishwater, trying my best to focus on the mindless task of scrubbing away at the stack of plates and bowls. Anything to drown out the endless loop of thoughts and memories swirling through my mind. The shrill ring of my cell phone sliced through the quiet kitchen. I tensed up immediately, water sloshing over the sides of the sink as I hurried to wipe my soapy hands and check the caller ID. Lisa's dad. Of course. With a weary sigh, I accepted the call. Hello? Kevin. His gruff voice was heavy with fatigue and resignation. I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from right now, but Lisa needs to see you. To talk. I pinched the bridge of my nose, squeezing my eyes shut as I struggled to find the words. Or rather, to muster up the energy to let him down gently yet again. Look, I get that you're in a tough spot here, I started, keeping my tone as even as possible. But we've been over this. I can't put myself through that again. Not after everything that happened. There was a pregnant pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment I wondered if he'd hung up on me. But then his voice came through again, smaller, defeated. Just, come see her, Kevin. I'm begging you. She's... He trailed off, seemingly struggling to contain his emotions. She's not doing well. The amnesia, the guilt over what she can't remember, it's tearing her apart. My chest tightened at the raw pain laced through his words. No matter how much Lisa had hurt me, she didn't deserve to suffer like that. To be trapped in a living purgatory with the fragments of a life she couldn't reclaim. Okay, I heard myself saying before I could overthink it. Okay, I'll come by tomorrow after work. But I can't make any promises, all right? The audible sigh of relief on his end was enough to confirm I'd made the right call. Thank you, son. You have no idea what this means. I ended the call and leaned back against the kitchen counter, feeling like the wind had been knocked out of me. What was I getting myself into? The next evening, I made the familiar drive to the hospital, my stomach tied up in anxious knots. I kept reminding myself that I was just doing this as a favor to her parents, that I owed Lisa herself nothing after the hell she'd put me through. But as soon as I stepped into that cold, sterile hospital room, all of my resolve melted away. Lisa looked so small, fragile and vulnerable, swimming in her hospital gown as she picked absently at her bedsheets. She didn't even seem to notice me at first until I cleared my throat. "Lisa? It's me, Kevin." Her head whipped up at the sound of my voice, her eyes widening in a mixture of shock and hope. A look I recognized all too well from those final, agonizing days of our marriage. "Kevin?" She reached out towards me, her slender fingers trembling. You came." I crossed the room in a few strides, taking her hand in mine despite every self-preservation instinct screaming at me not to. Her skin was cool to the touch, her grip surprisingly strong as she clung to me. "I'm here, Lise. I'm right here." She stared up at me with those big, soulful eyes I had fallen for all those years ago. But there was a haunted, lost quality to them now that shattered my heart all over again. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "For whatever I did, whatever I can't remember. You have to know how sorry I am." My throat burned as I struggled not to get choked up myself. This was the Lisa I knew, the woman I had devoted half my life to, not the unfamiliar monster who had betrayed me. "I know," I managed to reply, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze. "I know you are." We stayed like that for a long while, her quiet sobs the only sound filling the tense silence. Eventually, she seemed to collect herself, swiping at her damp cheeks as she met my gaze again. "Part of me doesn't want to remember," she admitted in a small, childlike voice. I'm scared of what I'll find out about myself. About what I did to you, to us." My heart twisted in my chest. God, how I wished I could just tell her the truth. Let her in on the brutal reality so she could process it, heal, and move on. But something held me back. "Maybe it's better that way," I heard myself saying. "Maybe we can start fresh? Wipe the slate clean and begin again?" Her eyes widened at that, fresh hope flickering across her delicate features. "You mean, you'd be willing to give us another chance? After everything?" I opened my mouth to respond, to firmly but gently shut down that line of thinking. To explain about Emily and Rachel and my new lease on life. But then I really looked at her, at the fragile, broken woman lying before me. And I just couldn't do it. Couldn't be the one to shatter her world into pieces all over again. I don't know, Lise," I finally managed, forcing a tight smile. "Why don't we take things one day at a time, okay? No need to put too much pressure on anything." She seemed to relax at that, the faintest of smiles tugging at her lips as she nodded. "Okay. One day at a time. I can work with that." We lapsed into a more comfortable silence after that, her hand still loosely grasping mine. Part of me knew I was playing a dangerous game, knew that I was only delaying the inevitable by not ripping off the Band-Aid. But another part of me, the part that still loved her, no matter how deeply she'd cut me, wanted to savor this fleeting moment. To pretend, just for a little while longer, that we were still the golden couple I had believed us to be once upon a time. As I eventually rose to leave, Lisa caught my arm, her eyes shining with a mixture of hope and trepidation. "Kevin, would you want to go to dinner with me sometime? You know, when I'm feeling a bit better? Just us, on a date?" My heart stuttered in my chest as I studied her expression, so open, so painfully vulnerable. This was the Lisa I had fallen for, peeking through the cracks of the amnesia like a wildflower determinedly sprouting up through the concrete. I wanted to say yes more than anything. To turn back the clock and try to recapture that spark we'd once had. But I knew I wouldn't. Not after everything. And not with Emily waiting for me, ready to show me what real, healthy love looked like. "Lisa," I started, keeping my voice as gentle as possible. I think that would be a mistake. You and we had our chance. A pretty amazing one, if I'm being honest." Her brow furrowed in confusion, her mouth opening to protest. But I pressed on before I could lose my nerve. "But that was then, and this is now. And I've moved on. Found someone new, who makes me incredibly happy. Understanding finally seemed to dawn in her eyes, quickly followed by a hollow sadness that was like a physical gut punch. I wanted nothing more than to take the pain away, but we both knew I couldn't. "I see," she whispered, her hand falling away from my arm. "Well, I'm happy for you, then." Truly. The lie was obvious, but I didn't have the heart to call her out on it. With one last lingering look, I turned and headed for the door, fighting back the lump of emotion clogging my throat. "Kevin?" she called out, stopping me in my tracks. I glanced back over my shoulder, terrified of what I might see on her face. But she just offered me a brave, trembling smile, one last gift from the woman I would always love, despite everything. "Thank you for giving me another chance, even if it was just for a little while." I couldn't find the words to respond, simply giving her a somber nod. Then I was gone, fleeing back into the harsh fluorescent glare of the hospital hallway and the reality of my life now. My breath was coming in ragged bursts by the time I reached the parking lot, the weight of that conversation finally crashing down on me. I had been so close, so goddamn close to slipping back into the undertow after fighting so hard to stay afloat. Epilogue. The crisp autumn breeze carried the faint sound of laughter as I straightened my tie and took one last look in the mirror. Today was the day, the fresh start I never could have imagined wanting just a few years ago. "You ready for this, old man?" I turned to find Rachel beaming up at me, looking unbelievably grown up in her puffy lavender dress. Her unruly curls had been tamed into an elegant updo, making her warm brown eyes seem even bigger and brighter than usual. "You know it, kiddo," I replied with a wink, trying to ignore the jumble of nerves fluttering in my stomach. "But shouldn't I be asking you that? This is a pretty big day for both of us." She rolled her eyes dramatically, every inch the sassy preteen she was quickly becoming. "Oh please, I'm way more chill about this than you are. Now let's go. We can't keep my mom waiting at her own wedding." With one last steadying breath, I followed Rachel out of the room and into the flower-strewn courtyard where the ceremony was being held. Clusters of loved ones were already seated, chatting and laughing as the band played a jaunty tune in the background. My gaze immediately found Emily standing at the front, looking more radiant than I could have ever imagined in her elegant white gown. She caught my eye and smiled, a warm, loving smile that reached all the way to her sparkling eyes. This was what true happiness felt like. The ceremony itself was a bit of a blur. Rachel's cheeky wink as she made her way down the aisle as the flower girl, Emily's watery smile as we exchanged vows and rings, the raucous cheers and applause as we were finally pronounced husband and wife. I didn't miss the fleeting look of sadness that flickered across Lisa's mother's face as she watched us share our first kiss as a married couple. She and Lisa's father had made the journey to attend, despite the painfully complicated situation. Lisa herself was conspicuously absent, still in the hospital and unable to handle such an emotional event. I tried not to dwell on it too much, determined not to let anything ruin this perfect day. As the night wore on and the drinks flowed, I couldn't help stealing glances at my new wife, still in disbelief that this was my reality now. Just a few years ago, I had been a broken, shattered man, certain I would never experience joy like this again. But Emily, Emily had been the light at the end of that long, dark tunnel. She had shown me the way back to peace, to laughter, to love. More than that, she had given me the courage to let go of the past and embrace this new beginning with open arms. When the last few die-hard guests had finally trickled out in the wee hours of the morning, I swept Emily up into my arms and carried her over the threshold of our new home, our mingled laughter echoing through the stillness. "I love you, Mrs. Johnson," I murmured, peppering her face with feather-like kisses. "More than you'll ever know." "And I love you," she replied simply, her eyes shining with pure adoration. Now and forever. That night, as we moved together in the dimness, I felt something deep within me finally click into place. A piece of my shattered soul slowly beginning to knit itself back together. In the 2 years that followed, our little family continued to blossom and grow, first with the addition of a son we named Michael, then a daughter we called Lily after Emily's late mother. I even mustered up the courage to officially adopt Rachel, making her my daughter in every sense of the word. Those years were some of the happiest and most fulfilling of my life. Every morning, I would wake up in our cozy home and just smile, listening to the sounds of my beautiful wife and children pottering around getting ready for their days. Simple moments, like making pancakes with the kids or teaching Michael how to throw a baseball in the backyard. Moments I had once been certain were lost to me forever. Then, one crisp October evening, my phone rang. It was Lisa's father, Kevin. His voice was a ragged whisper, heavy with unspeakable grief. "It's Lisa. She's gone, son." The world seemed to grind to a halt as his words washed over me in an icy wave. Lisa, my Lisa, dead. Even after everything, after all the trauma and heartache, it felt like a vice was squeezing what little air remained in my lungs. How? I finally choked out, struggling to make sense of this latest cruel twist of fate. Complications from her injuries, he rasped out, the words seemingly torn from his very soul. The amnesia, the endless treatments and setbacks, it was all too much in the end. She just slipped away. White-hot tears stung my eyes as 1,000 memories came flooding back, of Lisa's bright, radiant smile on our wedding day. Of the way her nose would crinkle when she laughed at my dumb jokes. Of how perfectly we had fit together, two pieces of a puzzle finally made whole. My chest ached with the force of a grief I had thought I dealt with and moved on from long ago. But this was a whole new level of mourning. For the brilliant life she should have lived, for the second chance that had been ripped away from her grasp. For the fact that she had died without ever truly knowing the extent of her sins, or the depth of the love I had once held for her in my heart. The following days and weeks were a blur of funeral arrangements and somber gatherings, each one chipping away at me a little more. I held it together as best I could for Emily and the kids, but I knew she could see the pain I was wrestling with. "You know you can talk to me, right?" she murmured one night as we lay tangled together in the darkness. "About Lisa, about whatever you're feeling." I pulled her closer, breathing in the comforting scent of her hair as I struggled to find the words. How could I even begin to explain the tangled knot of emotions currently squeezing my heart? "I know," I finally replied, my voice little more than a hoarse whisper. "And I will, I promise. It's just a lot to unpack, you know?" She hummed in understanding, her fingers tracing soothing patterns across my back. "Take all the time you need, babe.